They thought it was a race. They thought speed meant power. So they rushed, they bragged, they tried to win every round before it even started. And you watched, you listened, you took your time. Because you weren't in it to impress them. You were in it to outlast them. Every move they made was loud, desperate, for show, and every move you made was measured, quiet, final. They mocked your patience, called you slow, passive, weak, but the truth is, they couldn't understand your strategy because they were chasing applause while you were building something that didn't need noise to be noticed. They spent their energy trying to be first. You spent yours making sure you were still standing when everyone else burned out. And now you're here, steady, sharp, unmoved, while they're tired, distracted, and falling apart. You didn't beat them by being better, you beat them by being there when they were already gone. That's not outsmarting, that's outlasting, and it's deadlier. While they were performing, you were preparing. They thought you were inactive because you weren't loud, but stillness isn't idleness. You didn't freeze, you observed, you calculated. You watched them burn bridges for attention, ruin alliances for claps, and sabotage long games for short wins. You learned more in silence than they ever did in motion. They pushed each other out of the way trying to lead. You stepped back, not because you couldn't compete, but because you knew leadership isn't about going first. It's about lasting long enough to still be relevant when everyone else has faded. They thought dominance came from being noticed. You knew it came from being remembered. Your patience wasn't weakness, it was war strategy, and every day they overlooked you. Every time they called you too slow or too quiet or too distant, they were helping you. Because the more they talked, the more they exposed themselves, and the less you talked, the more you built yourself. They didn't see the trap until they were already in it, because you didn't need to be ahead of them. You just needed to be the only one left when it all collapsed. They mistook your silence for fear, your calm for confusion. They thought you stayed quiet because you didn't know what to do. But you knew exactly what to do. You just chose when to do it. And that's what made you dangerous, because anyone can react. But it takes something colder to wait, to endure, to sit through storms and not flinch. They needed results right away. You needed results that lasted. They wanted recognition. You wanted leverage. So while they built everything out in the open, you built behind closed doors. While they performed for applause, you perfected your next move. And now that the noise is fading, all that's left standing is you and everything you prepared. They called your patience boring, weak, passive, but they never noticed how much damage can be done without raising your voice. They still don't understand how dangerous someone becomes when they don't need attention to prove anything, because what you were building wasn't for them. It was beyond them. You didn't compete with them. You outlasted their distractions. You outweighted their ego, and that's how you won. Quietly. You weren't waiting for their failure. You were watching it unfold. Because people who move too fast burn out twice as quick. They took shortcuts. You took the stairs. They made noise. You made progress. They laughed at your pace until they ran out of breath, and you hadn't even broken a sweat. They filled the room with ego. You filled the silence with focus. While they sought credit, you sought clarity. While they chased every trend, you mastered your path. And the moment their momentum slowed down, your consistency started to look like dominance. Not because you outsmarted them, but because you refused to race them. They tried to rush destiny. You built yours brick by brick, quietly, relentlessly, without shortcuts. That's why it lasts longer. That's why it holds more weight, because real results aren't born in noise. They're forged in patience. You didn't have to sabotage them. You didn't have to fight for space. You simply became undeniable on your own time. And that's what they can't forgive, that you didn't need them to win. They used to joke about how long it was taking you, about how slow your progress looked, about how quiet your wins were. But now the room is silent, and so are they, because your patience became pressure, and your silence, it became momentum, the kind that builds over time, steady, quiet, and then all at once. While they wasted their time watching each other, you were watching the clock. You knew timing wasn't about being early, it was about being right. You weren't in a rush to prove anything. You were waiting for the moment when everything would shift. And when it did, you didn't hesitate. You moved like someone who'd already rehearsed the ending. They weren't ready for someone who doesn't rush, because rushing is predictable. But patience is lethal. You didn't just last longer. You made them question why they were running in the first place. Now they look around and wonder how you got ahead. But you never sped up. They just collapsed first. Still here? That's not luck. Subscribe and keep building in silence. Now they're asking questions, quiet ones, the kind that come when people realize the game shifted without them noticing. They start tracing timelines, looking back, trying to figure out how they missed the moment everything changed. But there was no moment, just consistency, just silence. Just you, never stopping, never rushing, always moving. They still don't understand that you didn't win because you were smarter. You won because you never needed to rush. You didn't chase validation. You didn't compete for attention. You just waited. And while they got bored, tired, and sloppy, you got sharper, hungrier, ready. What they thought was inactivity was discipline. What they called slow was surgical. And what they thought was weakness, that was the pressure they couldn't survive. Because time is a blade. and you held it steady while they cut themselves with panic. You didn't beat them in the spotlight. You let the clock do the work, and now the same people who laughed at your pace can't even keep up with your silence. They underestimated what happens when someone stops rushing and starts refining, because speed burns fast, but silence burns slow. While they kept swinging wild to be first, you were sharpening your aim to be final. And when the dust settled, only one hit mattered. Yours. They ran with urgency. You moved with intention. They celebrated fast starts. You prepared for long finishes. And now they're exhausted, confused, looking for shortcuts that no longer exist. Because while they fed off momentum, you fed off consistency. And that never runs out. They thought visibility was strength. You made invisibility into strategy. They thought silence meant stuck. You used it to move unseen. And now they can't track you, can't trace you. All they know is they no longer know anything about you. And that's what eats them up. You didn't beat them with noise. You beat them with structure. You weren't louder. You were inevitable. And by the time they noticed, you were already gone, miles ahead, untouched and unworried. They spent so much time trying to be impressive, they never noticed they weren't improving. They were addicted to movement, to noise, to being seen. But progress isn't about being visible, it's about being unshakable. And now they're realizing all that speed got them nowhere, while your silence built something solid. They tried to race ahead by cutting corners, but every shortcut they took became another weak point in their foundation. And while they were sprinting toward applause, you were stacking discipline on top of discipline, quietly, daily, without need for validation. Now, the difference is clear. They look burnt out, lost, like they can't figure out why the momentum died. But it's simple. You didn't outshine them. You didn't outperform them. You simply kept going when they didn't. And that's what makes you dangerous. You don't break under pressure, you become pressure. They wanted fast wins, easy dominance. They wanted to rise quick, be seen, be praised, and they got what they wanted for a while. But now they're realizing something they never saw coming. Fast fades. Hype dies, noise disappears, and all that's left is who still shows up when no one's watching. And you're still here, not because you moved louder, but because you moved better. Because you didn't care if anyone was clapping. You weren't chasing applause. You were chasing edge, precision, longevity. That's why they're fading and you're still rising. Because you didn't burn out, you burned through. They exhausted themselves trying to dominate the moment. You invested yourself in mastering the process. They sprinted for attention. You walked straight into control. And the moment they ran out of distractions, they finally looked up and saw you, standing where they never imagined you'd be, at the top. Not because you tricked them, not because you beat them in a race, but because you never stopped. That's the difference. You didn't fight for a place at their table. You built your own, brick by patient brick. And now they want a seat. Now they study you in silence. Not because they admire you, because they fear what you became while they were too loud to notice. You didn't need a grand reveal. You didn't need a speech. You just needed time. And now that the noise is gone, your name speaks without a word. They always thought the winner would be the one who moved fastest. But winners aren't made in speed. They're forged in pressure, tempered by repetition. And you didn't rush. You didn't flinch. You didn't fold. You waited through the mockery, through the doubts, through the silence. And that patience That unshakable, calculated patience turned you into something they don't know how to handle, because they can't compete with what doesn't need the spotlight. They can't beat what they can't read, and they can't survive what never depended on their approval. You weren't chasing anything, you were watching, you were learning, and when their fuel ran out, you were just getting started.